Okay, thank you, Barbara. Thank everybody for joining us today. This is my second session with NYSAIS. Once this session is over at 4 o'clock, if there are some of you that would like to remain an additional 10 minutes for questions, where we have everybody unmute their mics, then we can ask those questions directly to me. The presentation today has 4 parts. One is I'm going to show you a PowerPoint, and then I'm going to stop midway through it and see if there are any questions that you put in the chat box. Then I'm going to show you the second half of this presentation, and then we'll open it again for questions. Then I'm going to go into the financial side and talk about the trade-offs of income and expense you might want to be thinking about in this particular stressful time. We'll see what questions there are then. Then depending on whether there's any windows left, I might talk to you a little bit about how do you market your school when the campus is closed, and how do you engage your parents as advocates right now. But right now I'm going to start with the head of school partnership with the board, and specifically what can the head do to manage various stakeholder groups, and what can the board do to support the head. So I got this a couple of weeks ago from a head of school client. I'm starting to think that the new normal for head of school is crisis management. In my case, first it was a financial crisis, then a suicide in the community, the local social unrest, and now the coronavirus, all over less than a 3-year period. I think organizational charts, contracts, training, legal protection, salaries, and the expectations for the head of school may need to start changing to reflect these new realities. The job is now high stress nearly all the time. I really want to stress that, because I'm finding that while heads always remain hopeful, the sense of threat and fear and concern about the burden of responsibilities on the shoulders of heads of school is coming through to me loud and clear from clients. Another quote from another head about 2 weeks ago: "I'm learning a lot through this, and I don't anticipate the learning to slow down anytime soon. What is different about this situation are the emotional needs and anxiety shared with me from so many. The mental wellness of folks in our community is fragile, as they are losing jobs, loved ones, and stuck inside managing children 24/7. Uncertainty is a beast." And I just want to have everybody remember the word jihui. It's a Chinese word that means both crisis and opportunity. And the reason I put that there is because we need to look at ways in which we can look past this crisis to opportunities. Another quote from a head of school about distance learning or remote learning: "You know, we as heads are having to gauge the sustainability of the pace for our faculty during at-home learning versus pleasing parents by keeping their children engaged academically. We are feeling the pull both ways, but I'm not sure our boards understand the pressure that puts us under. I don't want to throttle back on our academic expectations, but the faculty need to get into a routine and become more comfortable with the technology, and that's a part of the stress." So this first circle is what the head needs to manage. Related to the board, government forces, parents, faculty, staff, and the administrative team. I want to start with the board. I do believe heads need to help manage the board, and smart heads know how to do that in a way that boards don't feel managed, but they feel led. First of all, the information provided to the board, the unity among board members, avoiding factions, and ensuring that boards receive appropriate data on head turnover. Just to make sure everybody in the room knows this, the average NAIS tenure for a head of school in the United States is about 5 years. 80% of all independent school heads are fired. 80% of them are fired in their first 5 years. And the reason for that has a lot to do with an issue we're going to discuss shortly, and that is tenure of board members serving and tenure of board chair terms. I also find that it's interesting that boarding schools generally fire their heads less often than day schools, and you can figure out the reason for that. That elementary school boards fire their heads more often than K through 12 boards. That parent-dominated boards fire their heads more often than alumni-dominated boards. And here's a quiz for everybody out there: which boards fire their heads more often? Boards dominated by professionals or boards dominated by business leaders and CEOs? The answer is professionals, which dominate most of our boards. Most of our boards are made up of hardworking, dedicated lawyers, doctors, accountants, engineers, bankers, not many CEOs, but CEOs hire and fire people for a living and are answerable to a board. That's analogous to the position of the head of school. I hope every board out there has at least one active CEO on the board. Important thing to remember, there are 3 key partnerships. We've talked a lot about the head-chair partnership. I find that almost 80% of governance issues can be traced to the head and chair not getting along very well, but about 20% of governance issues can be traced to the head and chair getting along too well, such that the rest of the board feels jealous or feels put off or feels they are not engaged or collaborated with. And this is a particular problem right now with heads and chairs needing to make quick decisions and board members not necessarily feeling engaged. I happen to believe that head-chair partnership is, of course, crucial, but there are 2 other partnerships we don't talk about as much, which I think are equally as important, particularly in these times. One is the head's relationship with each board member. The head needs to build political capital, or rather have political capital, with every single board member, not just the chair. I'm an advocate of the head meeting twice a year for an hour each with every single board member, asking them 3 questions. How am I doing as head? Not as far part of my formal evaluation process, but just how do you think I'm doing? Secondly, how are you doing as a board member? Are you feeling engaged? Are you feeling your services are properly used? And the third question is, how are your children doing? Because while you don't want board members using influence over the head related to their own children, it's politically suicide for a head not to know how the children of board members are doing. The third partnership is that of the chair with the rest of the board. I had a call 2 nights ago from a chair who said he was hearing rumbling among his board members prior to a retreat that he and the head have been making most of the decisions about the coronavirus issues, including closing school and when that was done. And other board members are talking about, are we adequately engaged? So I think we have to be careful about this. I have another client who called me and said that he had asked for a vote of confidence in the head of school to have the contract extended. This was about a month ago. And the contract, the vote of confidence was turned down, not because of the head's performance, but the chair honestly told me because he didn't have the political capital he needed to have with the rest of the board members to deliver that support. So those 3 partnerships are key. Right now, we need one strong leader who's clearly in charge, and we need clarity around that, and that should be the head of school. This is also a delicate and dangerous time for the selection and onboarding of new board members. If you think about it, that institutional memory that board members have is crucial. If you're bringing new board members on this summer, you might even think about bringing them on now so they can be a part of the discussion of what decisions are made going forward. But if you can keep board members who were normally rotating off, if you can keep a chair who was thinking of stepping down this summer, it might be wise to do that, because right now you need stability in the midst of this crisis, not too much change. I'm a big believer in the preserving of institutional memory. As a consultant for the last 30 years, I find among my almost 7,000 school clients worldwide now, a pattern. The pattern is the longer board members serve, the longer chairs tend to serve. And the longer chairs serve, the longer heads tend to serve. And the longer heads serve, the more financially sustainable and powerful with a greater academic legacy is the school. And the opposite is the case. The more the board turns over, the more the chair turns over, the more the head turns over, and the more crises we have. And in the United States, about 80% of the time, it's the 4th board chair who fires the head, largely because that chair was not on the board when the head was chosen and doesn't have a sense of that head's accomplishments over the last few years. So that whole sense of newness can create problems. As one board member said to me, don't you want to bring new blood onto the board? And I said, yes, we just don't want blood on the floor. And there's a difference. Board expectations on health and safety. I think everybody's worried about health and safety for the parents, for the kids, and for the staff members themselves. The head has to let board members know if we do, when we do come back, how is that going to be delivered? Boards are stressed about finances. They want to know whether or not we have to discuss a new financial model. One board member asked us one of these webinars not long ago, how can he constructively help the head to decide who gets fired and which programs are cut? And I think we have to stand back from that and say that is not the board's function. But what happens is board members will get antsy unless heads can demonstrate that they are proactively putting together different scenarios, maybe one based on things staying pretty well even keel, one based on maybe a 10 to 20% loss of enrollment, and perhaps a third scenario on a more catastrophic basis, a 30% or more drop in either enrollment or resources. Everybody is changing every day about board assumptions. I've got client schools in certain states who think they're going to open in May. I've got client schools who think there's no way they're going to open until late August or early September. I've got client schools who plan to open in late July or early August to make up for lost time. All of this could be out the window. If you think about it, I think we heard first that the virus might come back with a roar in late fall. We're now hearing that the virus is never going to go away until we're all vaccinated, and it could pop up in hot spots anywhere at any time. It's awfully hard to plan for that. So we had better have a plan. The school could be opened and then school could be closed down again. I've got a client school in Taiwan, which closed down and then opened up and now is opening up again, and everybody's wearing face masks. By the way, Taiwan's probably the best country in the world to set a model of how to do this. I think they have 350 cases, very few deaths, and they've been very good about managing it. We don't know when this vaccine is going to be. I read the other day that some British guy said it might be available in September. And then I heard somebody else say, yes, available, but the population won't be vaccinated until late December or even as late as April. I was listening today to the news where people were talking about we may have to be dealing with the financial impact of this for the next full 2 years. I wonder if we're ready for that. Particularly, I'm concerned about the Committee on Trustees and the chairman of the Committee of Trustees, who should be the most powerful person on the board, second only to the chair, because that committee needs to bring on the right people and ensure that they're disciplining the wrong people. So that committee has 8 crucial functions. And I will tell you honestly, I am not an advocate of term limits for board members of independent schools. Shocking as that may sound, I believe that the Committee on Trustees does its full 8 functions. You don't need term limits. You can counsel people off who are not doing the job, but you can keep great people on who you don't want to lose. One of the trustees of a school I once headed is still there 40 years later. And frankly, that family has made a dramatic difference in the life of that school. So those 8 items are cultivating a pool of prospects that has already, in fact, been cultivated. They don't know they're being cultivated as board prospects, but they're friends of the school that you could go to ask to be a board member. Second role of that committee is screening those prospects carefully, ensuring they're not one-issue candidates. You know, they want to fire the football coach. Third is inviting those prospects. Invitation is very important. It includes asking someone, if it came to a conflict between your child and the school, could you take off your parent hat and act as a trustee? That has to be yes, I can, otherwise you don't serve. So step 1 is cultivation. Step 2 is screening. Step 3 is invitation. Step 4 is orientation, which I hear from board members is the least accomplished process among our committees. Step 5 is governance training. Step 6 is evaluation of every board member whose term is up for renewal. Step 7 is warning board members of misbehavior. And step 8 is removing board members whose misbehavior continues. If you do all 8 of those, our boards will be stronger. But frankly, we need to keep those board members in place. I was working with a school in Canada a couple of weeks ago, 25 board members in the room. The head's been there 6 years. I asked everybody who was on the board when that head was chosen by the search committee to please stand up. Embarrassed silence, and then 3 people stood up out of 25. Almost a total loss of institutional memory in the boardroom. The head also needs to know how to manage relationships with government. Could be school district, could be town, could be county, could be state. We need clear communication with, to and from those forces. We need to know, do we have connections, networking, influencers, so we will know more about, will our state open up? And if so, when? I did this program for the Florida Council of Independent Schools. That governor is talking about opening up on May 1. What are those schools going to do? Are you prepared for a roller coaster ride that you may be opening up and closing down? I've got a client that was about to launch a search 2 weeks ago, and then they found they had a coronavirus case among a student in the boarding program, and now they are focused entirely on tracing everybody that came in contact with that child. Search is a long idea further away. Other government issues, information conduits. Everybody's applying for the SBA. The money is almost entirely used up already. Independent schools, associations like yours, everybody's trying to figure out how are we going to get that money? Fascinating process. But at least you should know what your options are. What common interests do we have with local government forces? Do we have shared values? Do they see us as important as a school to the larger community? We should be staying in touch with local medical and hospital services, both to know what services our community can get in these times and also how we could help. Clearly, we need to understand tracing, as I just mentioned. And public schools are not getting great reviews for distance learning right now. I have several clients who have opened separate platforms to offer distance learning to community public school students. They are not charging for this service, but I believe if this goes on long term and comes up again next fall, they will charge for it and make it into a profit center. Also, finally, in dealing with government, how can we be good citizens at time of distancing? Somebody on one of these webinars asked me, what about our IB program and the service requirements of it? Can we not get out in the community and provide services? Or are our parents going to be so terrified about what that means that they will back off from that? That is a conundrum. And I think our parents are going to be thinking very much first right now about the safety of their own children. But of course, we as school leaders have to think about the service piece as well. What can the head do, or what does the head need to do to manage parents? Well, calm and consistent communication, avoid information overload, but build political capital with those parents. One of my head friends said, offer courage, support, trust, and history. And by history, it means maybe these kids should write some journals about what this experience is all about and someday share it with their grandparents. I have several head clients right now who have a direct email platform that is confidential between them and every single parent in the school who signs up. And I was told that prior to the crisis, they got maybe 30 to 40 emails a day from parents, which these heads answered. Now it's 300 to 400 a day and takes several hours a day to respond. But I'm still hearing, despite that stress load, that is a way to hear what parents are thinking and feeling before something goes into fake news on social media and they've lost control of the narrative. We need to remain firm with parents, not to waffle, analyze the facts, and set a course. Parents want certainty in troubled times, security in dangerous times, and confidence in leadership now. I believe this is the time for heads to exercise a sense of confidence and direction and not waffle. We need to mobilize the parents and engage them now. I have had at least 15 or 20 parents of different school clients with which I have worked over time, and I met these parents, asking me the following. I'm at home, I'm working from home, my kids are here, it is a bit crazy with distance learning, but I would like to know how I could help the school. Is there any way we can help the school and not just feel not useful? Yes, there is. You can ask those parents to engage in 3 ways. I think number 1, you need to engage every single parent 2 or 3 times a week by social media, or preferably a phone call, or social media with a phone call, where you're finding out how they're doing, and you could do that through your teachers. I've talked to several schools where every single teacher is assigned 6 to 8 to 10 parents to call 2 or 3 times a week to ask how they are doing, and then to pass that up to a line administrator who filters that information and pass it to the head so that the parent body feels connected. I had a board member call me. He's a board member of a day school and a boarding school. He told me his boarding school had not communicated in 2 weeks to the parents. And he's on that board and he is furious. He is also on a day school board where he has 2 children, and that school has been communicating about 3 times a week. And he feels that's what you need to do. So mobilizing your parents first to help you keep your current parents confident comfortable, and sane, but also having parents help you ensure that parents who are already enrolled for next year, you don't lose. You keep those parents engaged. They may have signed a contract and they may have paid a deposit, but it doesn't mean they won't pull away. So you need some way to stay in touch with them. And then finally, engaging your parents as proactive parent ambassadors to recruit new parents, turning your parent body, from a dispassionate, passive consumer of the product into a passionate advocate and brand manager for the product. This is a perfect time to do that. Ask parents to be understanding about distance learning. It's going to take a long while. And if you read this article in the New York Times yesterday, it ain't working too well from what I'm seeing across the country and the world, but we're managing. We will get better at it. What does the head need to do to manage the faculty and staff? Well, in 2008 to 2010, a lot of schools froze retirement accounts and some other benefits. Most tried not to fire teachers or lay them off. Some had to push them to part-time. And by the way, they greatly increased their financial aid packages, but are we going to have to consider this? What about protection and safety, both physical and emotional, for teachers? When we open school again, that whole distance, social distancing is going to be a big issue for everybody. From what I'm hearing, we're not just going to be able to go back to where we were. The social distancing is going to have to continue for months. Possibly, they're saying, even for 18 months to 2 years. A whole new world for teachers too. Who are the key influencers among the teachers? Who are the players who can hold the faculty calm, who can be the best communicators for heads with their faculty culture? They need reassurance and appreciation, even though we're having to deal with issues of contract timing, possible layoffs, offering letters of intent rather than formal contracts. If you've already given out contracts and your enrollment goes way down, what are your rights to reduce overhead? Do you have to negotiate that with bargaining of some sort? Or do your contracts say you can do that legally in your state based on economic circumstances? Tell the staff the truth about financial pressures, but be an advocate for the balance of what teachers need to do from home versus parent expectations. Dealing with staff anxiety about continued distancing. So overall, I think with staff, we have to be honest, we have to be fair, but heads still have to be advocates for those staff members, even with these struggled times. What does the head need to do with managing the leadership team? Well, make sure there are appropriate boundaries of what that team does and does not do. Make sure the team building that you've done in the past with PD was working, that there's no cliques, that you delegate appropriately to them, that the chain of command to the top is clear. Insist on confidentiality. I've had several schools now tell me they thought they could keep things confidential, decisions that were being made, and they've learned the hard way they could not. Ensure that political capital that flows to the head's role is not always just from the head down, but from the bottom up. Heads of schools basically have a target on their back. Every decision they make is an arrow in that target. And when enough arrows hit that target, they're politically dead. So heads need to rebuild that political capital or put new gas in that gas tank, primarily from two sources. One is historically board members or the board as a whole that would respond to the head's requests for more salary money, better benefits, more PD, all of which might be very tight now because of money. But that was a huge source of political capital for heads doing things for the staff. But the second source is often the lower, middle, and upper school heads who often have a closer relationship with their parents, teachers, and students, and who love the popularity position they hold, but they need to pass some of that political capital upwards to the head of school because the head of school needs it. It can't just be one way. Administrators need to help keep parents and staff calm. They need to be a part of brainstorming new financial and academic models. I'm remembering many years ago, Colorado College had and still has the Colorado plan, the block plan, which basically was 6 to 8 weeks at a time, studying one subject at a time, not the fragmented scheduled school day, which we traditionally have in schools. We might not need to start thinking outside the box about scheduling. We need to know what steps to take as administrators if this goes on longer than we're anticipating. And as I mentioned earlier, we need to reach out to all newly enrolled parents. Okay, let's see if there's any questions to this point before we go to what the board can do to support the head.
So far, there are no questions in the chat.
Okay, so what can the board do in the realm of governance, in the realm of the personal life of the head of school, in the realm of working with the management team, and in the realm of parent management? So what can the board do to support the head in the realm of governance? Maintain confidentiality. Every board member should be signing a confidentiality agreement every single year. Every board member should be signing a no conflict of interest agreement every single year. Boards need to honor boundaries. The independent school model is an hourglass model. At the top is the board, and in the center is the head, and then below at the bottom are all the stakeholders. That model only works if people go through the center. But if you jump channels and cross boundaries, either from the board to the stakeholders or the stakeholders to the board, that model breaks. It does not work. You have to honor the boundaries. We need to streamline decision-making. It's already being done. We need to strengthen the head's power base right now because everybody is shooting at the head. And this next phrase is blunt, and I apologize for that, but I've always believed at a time of crisis, you should do these three things. This is a time of crisis. So to the board, I would say, circle the wagons, shut up, and support your head. By circle the wagons, I mean do not break ranks. Do not split, do not fall into cliques. Secondly, shut up does not mean don't talk about issues. It means don't break the confidentiality of the boardroom, including with pillow talk. And support your head means don't throw your head under the bus, literally or figuratively. Don't criticize the head outside the boardroom. It's a tough enough job now. Board members need to avoid favoritism or the appearance of it in responding to parent pressure or alumni pressure. This is what I'm hearing a lot about right now. The head and the chair need to engage every single board member and tap into their appropriate talents and expertise because those board members are getting antsy. If there is not something they can do constructively, but just sit on the sidelines or not be a collaborative part of the process, they are not going to be happy. And we want board members appropriately engaged without inadvertently inviting them into micromanaging the head's operational decisions. So how to do that, I would admit, it's a tightrope, but we have to work on it. We also have to look at risk assessment options based on the time frame of opening the school. What can the board do to support the head on a personal basis? Well, appreciation given in many forms would be nice. Heads don't get a lot of that. Financial support, benchmarking compensation nationally, now especially. By the way, our firm has benchmarked the compensation for the heads of schools of over 7,000 schools worldwide since 1983. We have the largest and most accurate database in the world on that topic, and we are hired only by boards, not by heads. Somebody asked me, are heads being asked to take pay cuts or no pay increases for next year? We are finding that our work with boards is actually equal to or higher than it's been in every previous spring, asking us to help benchmark compensation for heads of school, probably because people don't want to see heads' base pay going up substantially at a crisis time, but there may be ways, in fact, with deferred compensation or performance-related pay or something that relates to the 5 or 6 or 7 year vesting agreement you might have with deferred compensation. That is how likely more money is to be put into the bank for a head of school, based in part on performance, but also because of the stress factors involved. Is there family support for the head's family? Do the board members know how the family is doing? The spouse, the partner, the children. After this, are we going to give some of these heads sufficient time off? Mini sabbaticals, whatever. I had a full year sabbatical after 8 years of head of Breck School. I went away for a full year and I came back for 3 more years. That sabbatical was sponsored by my school. I think I was the first head in the US who went on a full year sabbatical, which was not a severance pay to get rid of me. So coming back from a sabbatical is very important, but we're gonna have to do some good PD work as to what professional development will look like for heads after this crisis, or maybe even during it, to get them more ready for it. We have to reconsider defining the role. How are we going to redefine this role after the crisis? I mean, it could be a very different definition. including what support system a head needs to support their efforts. What the times have taught us and how, and even if heads can continue to manage this level of stress. I think you need to remember that heads are caregivers, and they also have a right to ask who's caring for them. I'm an advocate, by the way, that you should have a term life insurance policy for your head that is substantial, where the head's family is the beneficiary. You should have a separate long-term disability policy for the head of school, and you should have a separate medical plan and annual executive medical to ensure your head of school is healthy. There are a lot of divorces in the ranks of heads of school. There are a lot of children feeling a different kind of stress. Boards need to be conscious of that. What can the board do to support the head with parents? Well, everybody wants transparency. It's a wonderful word, but confidentiality is the flip side of that. There are some decisions that boards are going to have to make now that may not be openly communicated immediately. Boards need to avoid promises that may be impossible to keep. They need to have firm and consistent communication with parents. Again, they need to have clear boundaries and hold the line and circle the wagons in terms of not breaking ranks. They need to be clear about role and function. What decisions can the head make on his or her own versus what decisions need to be made in consultation with the board? That is a crucial issue. Who can make the decision? How fast does it need to be made? And can either the head and chair together or the executive committee together, or does the whole board have to be consulted about some of the changes that we have to move on quickly? We need to review the financial picture immediately. What are the trade-offs of income and expense? And I'm going to ask you to seriously consider undertaking an exercise with your board members that can be done long distance on Zoom. And basically what I would be suggesting is that you have board members grade the 5 areas of income and then separately the 5 areas of expense that all of us as schools face, and mark every one with a plus, a 0, or a minus. A plus means we're going to spend more in this area, or we're going to cut more in that area. And then what are we going to do about keeping it flat? That would be 0. And minus would be this is an area we're going to cut back on. I'll go over that in more detail in a moment. One of the questions that parents are asking is, can they get a refund on tuition, a refund on bus or food or early childhood extended day activities? Probably not on tuition if you're doing distance learning, but on things like boarding school, dorm fees, food fees, bus fees, we're probably going to have to give refunds on that, or ask parents to donate it, or perhaps ask them to put it towards next year's tuition. And how are we going to explain to parents what the next steps are? Closing and opening, and possibly even having to do that multiple times without confusing them. We can also need to make sure they don't think this is going to be just a simple solution of when we open again. It's clear that's not going to be the case. How can the board support the head with an administrative team? Well, we need to keep those people. So timely contract renewal. Be honest, all good leaders are frightened now, even though they might not admit it. Succession planning, boards have always wanted to know there was a succession plan if something happened to the head. There probably now more than ever needs to be a succession plan where at least an internal person is strong enough to step into the head's role if they needed to for a year or two. We also need board support of the leadership team, but never bypassing the head in communications to the team. Heads sometimes have a lot of administrators in the boardroom. I think you need to review that discussion as to who's most important to be in that room for discussion now, and what's the role of the leadership team in the financial review of income and expense. Are we overstaffed or understaffed in administration? I think now we do have to assign every single family to an administrator who stays in touch with them, possibly through teachers in that division who are actually making those phone calls. And then the whole issue of social distancing. I mentioned my Taiwanese client where everybody is in masks. Everybody is at school, but they're all wearing masks. And classes are being restructured into how they function. By the way, I'm hearing that parents are not terribly happy with early childhood distance learning. Middle school seems to be working okay. High school seems to be working better with greater independence. But there is a lot of falling through the cracks and a lot of kids who are not necessarily doing the work or the assignments consistently. So let's see if there are questions. Let me do this part first. Some of the financial questions. What's our refund policy, our tuition policy, and what's our financial aid policy? Do you remember in 2008, 2010, when most of us were trying to meet the NAIS desire of having us spend 10% of our budget on need-based financial aid? In 2008 to 10, schools were spending up to 25% of their budgets on need-based financial aid, and it was not funded by endowment or annual giving. We basically reached out and supported our families to keep them. You don't use the word tuition discounts, but that's essentially what we were doing. Are we going to have to do that again? What are the strategies in regard to enrollment, retention, and recruitment? There's no question in my mind that retention always comes first over recruitment. You need to keep your current families. And I'll just tell you a quick story I learned a long time ago. When I was head of rec school, I would have parent coffees in homes in the fall for every single grade level, pre-K to 12. Parent Association sponsored them. They were held from 7:30 to 9 in the evening. My division heads were there, a couple of teachers were there, a couple of board members were there. And at the kindergarten parent coffee, I remember once we had 60 parents sitting on the floor in the living room of the smaller house. And one of the parents asked me about college placement, how many kids went to the Ivies, and when were we going to start informing the kindergarten parents about the college placement process. And I must have smiled or in some way conveyed a sense of dismissing his question when he got kind of angry and said, "Why are you laughing?" And I said, "Oh, I don't mean to be laughing, but that's a lot of pressure to put on a 5-year-old when it's 13 years away." He stood up, he looked at me and he said, "Is this a pre-K-12 school or not?" I said, "Yes, sir, it is. Might you like our family to stay to the end?" And I said, "Yes, sir, we would." He said, "Mr. Littleford, I'm going to tell you something called retention strategies. If I'm coming in the bottom end of this tube, I damn well want to know what it's going to be like going out the top end of the tube. I have a right to know those things. You would be smart to remember that not all of us in elementary school necessarily know enough about the high school to stay here. Those are called retention strategies. You darn well ought to tell us about college placement now." He was right. I was wrong. I learned a lesson. Do we need to look at new forms of income? Profit centers are going to have to be a much bigger part of our pie chart in the future. For many independent schools, they are already 10% of income. They need to be more. Are we going to have to let people go, put a freeze on benefits, have some people go to part-time? There's a lot of competition we're going to see from the for-profit schools out there. There's a lot of for-profit chains working now in the world, in the US as well. And they've been doing some distance learning for quite some time. They're better at it than we are. We need to get better. We need to frame our academic issues and get ahead of the curve. Do we need to look at an entirely different financial model? I'm going to show you one in a minute. Leaders need to stay positive. Part of the stress on heads is that they cannot show it. When I was a young head of school, 28 years of age, my assistant head, who was 45, called me into her office and said she needed to talk with me. And she said, "What's wrong with you today?" And I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "You look like you have the weight of the world on your shoulders." And I said, "Well, that shouldn't be anybody's business." And she said, "Yes, it is, because you're showing that anxiety or demeanor or whatever it is that's bothering you. And people are keying off of you, wondering if they should be worried." I looked at her and said, "Are you serious?" And she said, "Yes. Leadership is about not showing stress and listening to other people's stress." Well, at the time, I didn't take that advice too well, but I think that's really key. What if the population's not vaccinated or cannot be vaccinated before next spring or even further? Can we make our tuition case if social distancing must stay, not just for 2 or 3 months, but possibly 18 to 24 months? So just some questions to think about. So look at the bottom. How do we engage the board in an exercise to evaluate where you can raise income and where you can reduce expense? So on the expense side, we have 5 areas typically. We want strong program, curriculum, and technology. We tend to want low and moderate class size. We tend to want strong maintenance of physical plant. We know we need strong financial aid. We want competitive salaries and benefits. So this exercise for your board is one I suggest you do almost immediately. Assess each one of these with a plus, minus, or 0. If you feel the need to spend more on this program next year than you have this year, that's a plus. If you think you're going to be spending about the same amount, that's a 0. If you think you're going to be spending less, that's a minus. Think of it as a water bed. A water bed has a limited amount of water in it, but where you put pressure down will pop up in other areas. So this requires the board thinking clearly about what are the priorities in the areas of expense. In the areas of income, we've really only got 5. Full enrollment, because enrollment, if you can fill empty seats and you don't have a lot of additional overhead, that's income. So managing the full enrollment is one of the income sources. Obviously, increases in tuition and fees is an income source. Giving of all kinds is an income source. Profit centers and class size. If you raise class size, you generate income. If you cut class size, you generate cost. Same exercise. See which of these is a plus, a minus, or a 0. Or to put it this way, if you think you can reach full enrollment, even more than you had this year, that's a plus. If you think you're going to be flat in enrollment, that's 0. If you think you're going to lose enrollment, that's a minus. Giving is an example. If you think you can get giving up more than this year, that's a plus. You think it's going to be about the same as it was this year, that's a 0. You think it's going to be less this year, that's a minus. By the way, keep in mind a couple of things. I don't think you should be reducing your tuition for next year. Whatever your tuition was that it was announced, it's not a good idea to start cutting it or flattening it out, or absolutely not to reduce it. Look at the need-based financial aid picture, substantially increase your financial aid pool, try to assess your parent needs that way, rather than permanently getting into setting a practice that tuition will be frozen or tuition increases you made you'll have to cut back on. You really want to think about giving as well. A lot of people may think, okay, the capital campaign has to be put on hold. People's 401ks, people's income, entrepreneurs who might have given valued stock is down. But in 2008, 2010, the smart schools slowed down the campaigns, but kept their campaign structures in place. And when we came out of that recession, those were the schools that won the game and did much better than the schools that had stopped and cut off their capital campaigns entirely. So how do you manage the goals while managing the budget? How do you do those trade-offs? Well, you got to think about what tuition will the market bear, if any now. You've got to think about the fact that for 2021, tuition increases were in the 4 to 6% range. Should that be reduced at all? Or do you beef up aid? Schools are now facing questions of tuition refunds, greater financial aid, deep discounts. Be careful here. Whatever you do becomes a precedent. And do we need to rethink the entire financial model? Do we modify or do we hold firm on tuition? Fee income, oftentimes overlooked. Fees can be very important. Bus fees, extended day fees, food fees, transportation fees, gym fees. I am a big believer in unbundling. I don't think you should bundle tuition and fees. I think in the long run, it hurts us economically. Total school enrollment. I'd look down at the 3rd paragraph there. Marketing the full enrollment, marketing the mission, and that means mobilizing the parents as brand managers and passionate advocates now. Your parents are out there sitting at home looking for ways to help you, not just to be anxious about their family. You need to tap into that. There's no better time to make parents feel valued and needed than engaging them now as ambassadors or advocates, or whatever word you want to use. Giving of all kinds. This is just a list of what those typically are. Read the bottom one though. If the markets come back strong in the summer or fall, those campaigns might be restarted. If you look at the market now, it seems crazy. When the bad news hits, the market goes up. I mean, I've never been a person who really understands the market, but in some ways, the market might surprise us and capital campaigns might still be successful. By the way, the old adage is you should generate at least 5 times as much in total income of giving of all kinds as you are expending on that whole office and its costs. Profit centers, bus service, food service, school, store, rental facilities, digital, virtual curriculum, camps and programs, dual curriculum and partnerships, and likely more local students. This is for international schools. They're going to be affected by having more local kids, not as many expats. Class size, that's an issue you have to think about. Usually lower school parents are really sensitive about class size, but upper schools usually can take somewhat more kids in some of those classes. Teacher salaries, this is one I think you have to pay attention to. For day schools, as much as 85% of all of our budgets are on staff salaries and benefits. And one of the 3 areas where boards have a right to be engaged is fiscal oversight. The other 2 are mission integrity and hiring and supporting the head. Almost every board member I have ever asked, how are salaries delivered at the school? Is there a mission-based philosophy? Is there a philosophy of compensation? Do you understand how the salary system works? None of those board members have ever been able to tell me that, other than the fact they gave the school a 2 or 3% pool to use for the head to expend. But of course, the worst form of compensation is the same percentage increase across the board to everybody, because that really hurts the younger people, even though it helps the older, higher paid people. You should think about what kind of a compensation philosophy should you have? What should the school reward? Look at all these items here. What is your mission-based philosophy that you need to really think about right now, and how you spend that 85% of the school's budget? So the salary system should reflect the compensation philosophy and deliver dollars effectively, fairly, and wisely. I stress this because board members don't have a right to know individual teachers' salaries, but they do have a right to know how effectively is the school spending its money. By the way, if Tony is still on there, I commend Loyola for doing that. Physical plant, you're going to have to look at, are you going to lean on the plant to spend money elsewhere? Do you have plant needs that you need to address now? Is this going to be an area that's flat? And program, do we review the richness over the overall program? What are we going to do about our spending on technology and on professional development? Are we underinvested in key areas of excellence, the coattails of any marketing success? What's our sales differential? What's the value added? We need to think outside the box. One of the questions I always think you should ask your parents when they talk about tuition is take the number of days you're in session and multiply it by the number of hours a day an average middle schooler is in school, and divide that into the average middle school tuition, and you'll get a cost per hour. Generally, for some schools, it's as low as $10 or as high as $20 an hour. But I think in many regions of New York, for example, that's babysitter fees. So you really want parents to think about the value added. One of the things I often ask parents about is 20 years from now, if your children are back home for Thanksgiving and you're all sitting down together and you ask your graduates of this school, what did you most get out of going to that school? What would you as a parent most hope they would tell you? That's a really key phrase and a really key answer as to how they respond, because it gives you the values that they are most looking for, which is not necessarily immediate delivery today. It's the longer term impact on that child while they're at school with you. We're going to have to boost our financial aid, no question. Schools will have to carry families, many of them, for the year ahead and maybe beyond. So the board's challenge, as I see it, is can you balance the areas of income and the areas of expense in a mission-based way and get onto that immediately? So these key dilemmas are an analytical tool and an opportunity, if you know how to use them, to evaluate, use, and balance them wisely. And I think that's an exercise you can do with your board members on a Zoom call. And I would suggest that it's simple. It takes about 45 minutes, because after everybody does it confidentially on their own, you then have them all share it, and you see whether or not they're on the same page or whether they're all over the place, in which case you better bring them together to get a consensus on that point. Let me just say 3 things. I think boards need to be really supportive of heads right now. At the same time, heads need to be engaging those board members and making them feel valued. That's a political issue I'm seeing out there. Second, I think we have to really and truly differentiate our product and our process and let parents still feel that what we have is so valuable, they should stick with us. So we have to make clear that that value is still there, even if we're doing distance learning. I also think that parents are going to value you as leaders if they know you have a plan for when you might start, a plan for what happens if you become a hotspot, a plan for what happens if you have to go back to distance learning again. There has to be a conveyance of more certainty. One of the craziest things about the United States right now, when you listen to the news media every day, it is totally disconcerting, because there does not seem to be any single plan, any single direction. Nobody seems to know anything. Even people are saying if you got the virus and you've got the antibodies, they're not at all sure that you're immune to the virus again, even within a few months. With all that uncertainty and fear, we as school heads, I think, have to design some sort of practical path forward on the academic front, the financial front, the staff development front, that is our best guess of what's going to work. And I'll tell you, a lot of my client schools in the Far East have had to do this earlier than we had to do, and they had to make some risk. They took some risk decisions, not all of which were unchallenged. But from what I've seen, those decisions were wise and thoughtful. And you're going to be carrying a target on your back, as you always do. I just think the board needs to back you 100%, because you're going to be making tough decisions and be held accountable by these stakeholders.